Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. You can probably see our setup's a little bit different today because today's conversation is one that is a little bit more unfiltered. It's kind of a conversation where we're talking about a topic that means a whole lot to a lot of different people, and that's security, specifically school security. You know, you see a lot of different things in the news, you see a lot of different opinions and politicized things, and I think it's important for us as a technology community, whether that be SaaS, hardware, or even service providers, that we actually have a meaningful conversation about how our community can best serve the world of school security and safety across not only K-12, but through higher ed as well. And that starts with quality information. So my guest today is somebody who has a wealth of experience in that space and can also provide some great and meaningful data points for us and some good conversation starters as we look to dive in deeper. And that's David Rogers, CMO of Raptor Technologies. David, thanks so much for coming on today.
Ben, appreciate you having me here.
You know, David, this is in a lot of ways, I like to think of this almost kind of as a State of the Union conversation because the unfortunate reality is that you see, I'm going to say the word, the unfortunate reality is that we see things like school shootings and we see the media coverage of it, and we don't have a great picture as a community of, okay, how big are these threats? What sort of threats are schools facing? And it's wildly important for us to go back to the data and ask the questions, because what we perceive as a threat or we perceive as something that's happening all the time may not be the exact reality that we're facing. So I want to ask this question to start, and let's use data. What sorts of threats, from a security standpoint, are our educational institutions facing on a regular basis? Is it school shootings? Is it access control? What are the real tangible threats that on a day-to-day basis our schools are facing?
Well, it depends how you're going to define threat, right? If you're going to talk about, school shootings, threats to other students, I mean, that is a constant. I mean, it goes on every day. I think you'd be a little afraid of how many things get headed off every day at a school or in a school district. I have a daughter who works for a branch of the government, and she'll say it'd scare you to death on how many terrorist things that they've headed off, right? But I think you also have to step back and go, everybody thinks school shootings are sort of a more recent phenomena that maybe dating back to Columbine, but you're seeing more and more of them, and there's more and more happening. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Back in the late 70s, I remember a school shooting in Austin, Texas, where I grew up. I had some older friends of mine that witnessed it. A kid came in and shot his substitute teacher. And so these things have been going on. Part of it gets exacerbated by the news cycle, right? But if you think of threats of self-harm, if you think about suicidal thoughts, if you think about abuse and bullying, those more mild threats to kids there on the campus, those things, we're seeing that escalate quite a bit. And those are actually the things that school administrators, teachers, coaches, bus drivers, they're dealing with that every single day. And that is honestly kind of really the genesis of some of the problems that we're starting to see, particularly with these school shooters. None of these kids woke up one day and grabbed a gun and said, I'm going to go shoot up a school. It all started somewhere down in their academic path. Usually third or fourth grade is where you kind of start to form those relationships, those social patterns, those friendships, and you can detect all the way back there that some of these kids were heading down that path. And that's because they were exhibiting different early warning signs. They were being bullied, unstable home. They were having mental health challenges. They were having academic challenges. They weren't showing up to school. They were absentee. And so, I think when you look at threat and take a broader definition, I do think it is expanding because we've had more mental health challenges with this last couple of generations of kids than we've probably ever seen. And I think having the tools, the technology, and things in place to address that is going to be important going forward.
Well, what's interesting too, and you and I have had a chance to talk about this offline, is we think about school safety as an 8 to 3 problem, right? Where if students are in the building, that's when we're thinking about school safety. But the reality is the campus exists 24 hours a day, right? And I think one of the conversations that people may not always hear, or facts that may be misrepresented a little bit, include incidents that happen outside of school hours, on the tangents of school campuses and things like that. And I want to spotlight those kind of uniquely because it's sort of a different challenge, right? It's almost a facilities management challenge at that point than it is a safety and security of the school challenge. What are the sorts of threats and challenges that you see? I'll even mention, you see statistics about school shootings and things like that. That includes gang violence that happens in non-school hours. That includes domestic threats that happen in non-school hours. The very tangents of campus. And I think it's important to make that differentiation because it helps us identify and treat the threat differently.
Sure. So one of the things that Raptor has is a panic alert technology. And so, this last year alone, this last school year, so the 23-24 school year, we had over 60,000 different alerts that occurred on that platform. And most of them had nothing to do with locking down because of a gun, right? But even when you do start to dive in and examine the ones where you had a lockdown or a hold because there was some sort of firearm involved, it typically was not a what we would think of as a school shooter.
Right.
It was either a targeted violence, could be gang violence, could be usually with some boys involved with a girl or drugs or something like that. A lot of times, quite frankly, it was something outside of campus. We had one in Connecticut where you had a half-naked guy with an AK-47 and standing across the street, and he was walking towards the school, and the teacher, used our panic button on our mobile app, and she put the school on hold, and but that had nothing to do with the school really. And then you're right, it's not just a school hours problem. You see a lot of things happen, before school. You had here in Dallas, you had a young man with a gun that shot somebody here, and it was before school opened up. You have a lot of after school type of activities. Once again, you see a lot of kind of gang violence and things around that. And then once again, the school campus itself usually is centered in neighborhoods, right? So whatever's going on in that neighborhood is usually going to bleed over into that school. So whether that be domestic issues, gang violence, what have you, that's just all going to kind of work its way back in because the schools are the center of the community. So it is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week problem that school safety professionals have to deal with.
It's interesting because it feels like every 5 to 7 years we sort of go through a full refreshment of technologies and best practices and updating of security postures, just naturally because of things that happen in the world. And we're at a point now where technology is pretty widely used in schools, right? Mm-hmm. And even in rural areas, right, where a lot of this technology is permeated. And I want to ask, obviously we're familiar with emergency alert, PA systems, things like that, and even flashing fire alerts and stuff like that. Where are we sort of in the life cycle of security technology being rolled out in schools? Obviously, you guys have some incredible SaaS and cloud style stuff, but that's a relatively-ish new phenomenon kind of in that world, right?
You're really kind of in the early days of it. So like the concept of panic alert technology, which really was kind of born out of the Parkland shooting. You've heard Lori Elladef, who has pushed Alyssa's Law, which was her daughter that she lost at Parkland. She's been going around the country pushing this concept of a panic alert that you can hit a button and the cavalry comes running. And what we have discovered in the old days, that was a button on the wall. Right. It could be something you have on a lanyard or something like that. But it was kind of one emergency with one response, right? And like I said earlier, school shootings are pretty rare. I know we see them, and unfortunately we're seeing them almost every year, it feels like, but in normal school day, they're pretty rare. There's a lot of other emergencies that occur. And so the technologies that have allowed us to have more context and contextual response are really kind of new and have been coming on over the last 5 years. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. So if you think about it, you might have a tornado here in the Dallas area. You might have a chemical spill in the lab. You might have a train derailment close to the school. Those are very different types of emergencies, they're either shelter in place with a tornado or evacuation in the case of chemical spill or a train derailment. But also have very different responses, right? You're not necessarily sending the SWAT team for a chemical spill. You're sending the fire department. So having the ability to communicate back to 911 dispatch, to the ECC, and help them understand the proper type of response, but also back here at the school, having practiced that and putting that into to the daily practice of how do you handle different types of emergencies. And technology has really aided that. Just to expand on that a little bit, on the back end, parents tend to want their kids back after there's been a big emergency. And they call it reunification in the school world. And technology has been a big help on that. If you think about Parkland, there were parents up until 2 o'clock in the morning at the Marriott there in Broward County trying to figure out where their kids were. That's got to be a horrifying experience as a parent. One of the things that we have found is technology can really help improve upon that. We've got a technology, they're using pen and paper, they're working off of rosters, they don't know where kids are. Whereas you can apply technology like ours where you know where the kids are. If they've been taken to the hospital, you're able to note that in the technology and you're able to contact the parents so they don't go to the reunification site. For the kids that are there, you know they're there, you know who the guardian is, there's no risk of parental abduction because you know which parents can actually pick them up and which ones can't, and you're able to move them through quickly so you're not stuck there till 2 o'clock in the morning. So you look at that type of technology, it's really inexpensive because of software. It's very expandable and out to rural areas and scalable into large school districts, like DISD and Houston ISD and all those big districts across the country. So I think what we're seeing is a shift in learning that you can utilize software in conjunction maybe with some of those hardware things that you were talking about to be able to have a better solution to help you respond to these emergencies faster and better.
What's interesting too, you talk about sort of that scalability piece, and in my mind it immediately says, the school that I went to, there were probably about 3 or 4 different generations of the building itself there, right?
Yeah.
You had the recently remodeled cafeteria and all of that, then you had the portables, then you had the school field house, and you had all these different areas of campus that were all on disparate security systems and were in different ages of use and even misuse in some cases, to be fair. The ask probably comes in to say, look, I've got all these places and I either have X number of dollars from grant money or I have X number of budget allotted by bond. I can't do everything, but how do I find a scalable solution to sort of integrate those? Is that realistic to try and integrate all those disparate systems?
Well, it is, assuming that they have things like webhooks and where you can do the API integrations to them. Not all of them do. I mean, we go out to a lot of districts that have really old access control technology. And quite frankly, we'll recommend to them, hey, you need to take some of those grant dollars and you need to, that needs to be a priority. Think of safety and security for schools, it's in layers, right? You got that outside perimeter, you've got tall fences. Should not be easy to get onto that campus except for where you want people to enter and exit on that campus. You've got locked doors, right? You've got camera systems. You've got armed SROs on the campus. You have attendance systems. You've got visitor management systems. All of these form the layers to make sure that you are able to pick up that person that you don't want on the campus, whether it's a shooter or a sex offender or an angry parent, right? You want to be able to have those layers pick them up. And we, quite frankly, are a big believer in the hardening of those campuses, right? Now, we don't want schools to look like prisons or anything like that, but there are practical things that you can do. So when we run into scenarios where, they probably need to focus on, taking care of some of those other pieces, I quite honestly, personally would feel pretty bad about asking them to throw dollars at us when they should be taking care of other things. Right. But I also personally feel pretty good in that software can be very inexpensive. I mean, at Raptor, we sell a lot of products. I mean, there's a big truck of stuff we have of software, and it's still, less than outfitting 2 football players on the football field per school. So, I mean, per year. So that's a fairly cheap price given all the other types of things, fences, hardware, bulletproof glass, or bulletproof film, things like that the schools should be doing. But But there is the ability to talk to those systems if they have that capability. So think about if you've got a PA system, that's been out in the last decade, if you've got an access control system, if you've got a camera system, systems like Raptor, like what we have, can plug into that. And we offer an API for free. We got over 75 partners out there that we work with already today. We do everything. We plug into everything from gun detection AI that they have on cameras to something simple like access control to make sure the doors lock automatically. But we can kind of act as a hub. And once again, that's something we do for free because it's the right thing to do.
Well, the natural next step in that question is sort of the IoT side of things, right? You talk about integrating all these different things. You've got smart locks on doors. You've got, emergency alert systems that are triggering. You've got warning lights. It's incredible to see some of the technologies that we've come out with recently. But, when you think about, we'll get to cell phones in a second. That'll be a separate question.
Oh, yeah.
But when you think about some of these connected devices, whether it be those smart locks, whether it be intercom systems, whatever, what is that next step in sort of the IoT side of things, right? We're sort of in this weird little kind of limbo where, hey, we've got some of these technologies. They're sort of a little bit expensive. Is it worth it? But what does that rollout look like, and how can people start that conversation?
Well, so first of all, there's some really cool stuff on the horizon. I already mentioned using AI for gun detection. There's probably about a dozen vendors out there that are doing that right now. If you have high-resolution cameras, they have the AI that can sit there and detect guns. We've seen software that can detect fights and knives and other things as well. So I think that's going to continue to get built upon. Think of it this way: if you're walking through a hallway and you've not checked in through the visitor management, and you're not a teacher, and you're not a student, and you're not a faculty member or staff or janitor, we probably have your picture already in the database because we're capturing that as part of your record. We're going to be able to tell you, hey, you've got somebody who is unidentified walking down your hallway, or probably more is the case, you've got a student out of the classroom that doesn't have a digital hall pass right now, and they should not be out of the classroom, right? So I think AI is going to go that direction. I think we've heard a lot about sensor technology. You're talking about IoT, but there's discussion around some of these sensors that we can be putting out to detect guns, detect chemicals for explosives, things like that. And then way down the path, and this kind of goes back to a little bit of the AI and facial rec, you're going to see how do we start getting ahead of these problems by detecting things like depression. There's actually a study out of Dartmouth where they've used an app that now can detect, based on the posture of your face or how you're looking that day, your mood. Are you depressed? So it could be detecting some of these early problems that kids might have. So there's obviously a lot of privacy concerns and things that we got to work through. We leave that up to governments to go figure out, right? But because you can do a lot of things in terms of you don't have to make that record necessarily identifiable with that kid. Facial rec makes a lot of people nervous. Quite frankly, using the technology already in a lot of schools. But I think that as we sort of sort through the privacy things, we're going to have to, weigh it out, kind of like we did, post 9/11. How much are we willing to, give to make sure that we have better outcomes, right? I think of what in the UK, where we also have software, we have an application that's called Safeguarding. And on a regular basis, they're capturing observations on kids, not because because the kids should be in trouble, but because they're observing behaviors that could lead to trouble. So they're trying to get ahead of them and doing early interventions and early problem solving, and it's been very effective. It's been effective at catching kids that were suicidal. It's been effective at keeping kids out of gangs, and so I think there's a lot of different ways technology can kind of come into play. I think as a society, we just have to figure out, how far is too far, how much is enough, and strike that balance.
That's a tough conversation, right? And that's where things, I think, start getting sticky for folks. Whether it be privacy, whether it be, hey, who's now accountable for counseling this kid? Who's now accountable for managing that? Because Look, I'm the parent of a new young daughter, and I'd be lying if I wasn't considering going to private school and things like that, because there are, there are conversations that are had, and in theory risks that are a little bit lower by going to a school like that. And it's just tough to think about, right? And now, I even mentioned cell phones earlier. You've got kids now that are using different cell phone technologies in class, and cyberbullying and things like that. It's things that you probably can't and shouldn't be able to monitor outside of the home, right? Parents, I fully support parents taking their kids' phones and looking at it every single night to see what the heck their kids are doing. But now sort of the ask is, we're crossing a border a little bit, where the ask is, hey, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a student or whatever, use some of your own stuff. I mean, is that muddy? Is that realistic for us?
Well, I think cell phones for kids in particular, there's a lot of talk of cell phone bans. Some states have already done it. Some states are weighing it. Some have said, well, districts are handling that. It is, quite frankly, it is a problem. Social media and all the things that go with it have really given a rise to a lot of these issues that we're having in terms of self-esteem and mental health issues with kids, bullying, cyberbullying you mentioned. So I think it's something that deserves serious consideration. We actually wrote a white paper on it recently, and you can kind of really look at both sides. It's funny. I've heard parents that on one breath they'll be talking about how bad social media is, and the next breath to say, they'll see something like what happened in Georgia a few weeks ago and say, I absolutely want my kid having the phone at the school because I want them to be able to call me if something bad happens, right? So I think, once again, we have to strike that balance. Where is the right balance? It is hard to monitor social media. All the monitoring solutions out there today that you see are typically for school devices, not the personally owned devices. It's hard to detect some of the threats that are being made. You've seen some of these shooters. They're not necessarily on the normal social media channels that everybody else. They might be on a gaming platform. They might be on something that's not as visible to parents. So, once again, it's a sticky one. As a technology company, right? We look at it and go, how do we, if students have phones and they are allowed in the classroom, well, there's technology that we can work to have, provide them an application that can, help them, raise their hand and signal, hey, I'm having issues, right? On the other hand, if they don't have phones in the classroom, you also want the ability for teachers to have them, because that is a tool that they can utilize. Whether it's not only for panic alert, but if they're observing different types of behavior, to be able to capture that. So it's once again, it's one of those things that we leave to the lawmakers. Technology can usually work around any type of problem, but it is certainly one that I think we're going to continue to be debating for the next couple of years.
Well, the good thing is, David, maybe this is an altruistic view of things, but I don't think at scale our government or our independent school districts or our educational institutions want security breaches, right? And I think that's a really good place for us to start the conversation, right, and work backwards, right? Because there's different levels of funding, there's different levels of
learning environments for the kids.
Exactly, and I think that really is where we start to step back, right? Because there's political implications. I think it would be remiss for us to deny that. But the reality is, kind of like you mentioned, is, hey, technology empowers us to do a lot of different things. We can take it up to the edge of comfort level with it. And that's the great thing about scalability and technology, right? Is, hey, if we want to roll out behavioral detection technology tomorrow and say that every kid that walks into a classroom at all times is under constant surveillance of biometrics, we can do that, right? It's actually probably a flip of a switch in a lot of different cases. But where do you think, especially from a technology standpoint, districts should start to have that conversation? Because obviously many of them, probably start at the access control level and then sort of work backwards, like you mentioned. Where should people start with that technology conversation?
I think you have to start going back to the layers of security. You got to go with what works, right? We're very focused, and we should be very focused on that, absolute worst threat, the school shooter, somebody coming in from the outside, right? That could potentially cause harm to our kids, right? So there's a lot of focus on that, and there should be. But so I think you have to have the physical pieces in place. I think that's number one. technology aids that, access control, cameras, all that. Those are good things. I think the next step is you do have to leverage, software platforms. I'll promote Raptor here because we do have a very unique platform in that everything is on one piece of software, right? We just kind of turn the modules on as you do it. But you do have to have things that talk to each other and talk to those other pieces of technology that you have out there, right? So that's important. I think the next step is you have to figure out, how do we get ahead? A lot of those technologies we're talking about are preventative, right? A lot of them are reactive, but how do we prepare better? We do more drills. You and I kind of talked about this earlier. If you don't flex a muscle, you're not going to know how to use it, right? So are we doing the right type of drills? What should we really be focused on? And then what are the truly preventative things that we can start doing? I mentioned the UK earlier in safeguarding, the whole concept of adult observed behaviors and capturing that and leveraging that to be able to have good outcomes for kids is a great use of technology because it can connect the dots. Right now, if you go across to every state in this country, they've got rules. Every legislature has put around rules around bullying, abuse, self-harm, mental health issues. They've all got rules and processes. There's no connective tissue in there. And quite frankly, it's not usually just a bullying case. It's usually bullying and it could be abuse. It could be bullying and because that kid's being abused at home, he's bullying others. It could be kids being bullied and he's also having mental health issues. So there's a lot of things where you've got to be able to start to connect the dots. And that's where we've been really bad in this country. I'm just going to lay it out there. We've been terrible at connecting the dots. And that is, quite frankly, one of the best uses of technology, I think, where we could go is just the ability to capture information and on the back end, serve it up in a way that we can address it faster and then track the intervention to make sure that we're doing all the right things that both the states require us to do, parental notifications and, utilizing the services that that we as taxpayers are paying for, make sure those things are going on and that these kids are getting good outcomes. What's happening right now is we're not connecting the dots and we've got a lot of kids falling through the cracks. They may not turn into school shooters, but they're also not turning into productive members of society. And that is ultimately what we want. Nobody wants their kid to be a school shooter. Everybody wants them to be president of the United States. And I got to tell you, right now, it feels like we're losing the battle on that because we've not, gotten out there and we've been focused on sort of big technology, big answers, easy buttons, and there is no easy button. We need technology that makes us do the hard work every day.
David, we'll land the plane with this, right? And this is a lot of times the uncomfortable conversation to have, and it's the one of self-ownership. Because you mentioned a lot of these safety best practices do start in the home, right? Specifically in the case of students, right? Yeah. I want to make a clear differentiation there. We're talking about students in this case. Where do I start as a parent, right? I mean, obviously, look, I'm going to teach my kid my values and things like that, but there is a reality that at the end of the day, I hand, my daughter over to a school system or a daycare system that has to be accountable. But, where does my accountability as a parent start, and how far into the conversation of school safety does that go?
Yeah, well, it has everything to do with school safety because what happens in the home is really bleeds over into what happens in the school. I will tell you, and there's plenty of studies out there that show two-parent homes and parental involvement all result in kids that are much better adjusted, right? And unfortunately, we're heading the other direction on that in this country, right? We've got more single-parent homes. We've got kids without a father figure in the home. We've got I'm not going to blame it all on video games and social media, but those are certainly contributing to some of the antisocial behavior we're seeing in kids. They don't have the social emotional skills that they should, that generations like mine grew up with, right? But I'll also say, because of technology, it's never been easier to be involved as a parent. I mean, I'm just, my kids all through growing, I've got 5 kids, we knew what every test score was and every grade because the technology served it up to us. Right? We knew if they were passing or failing. My parents had no clue what I was doing. Right? We know what type of behavior is going on in the school because the teachers are able to use technology to communicate that to us today. My parents had no clue what I was doing. Right? And so there is so many ways for parents to be involved more and leverage that technology and leverage that capability. It's a wonder we're not, but I also, I think it's parental involvement at the end of the day is going to be one of the keys to solving this problem. I think, I talked about being able to look at behaviors and intervene earlier. If you don't have parents as a partner in that intervention, because once again, not all kids are perfect, not all kids are straight A students. Kids are going to have issues, right? And they're going to have depression, and they're going to have, particularly post-COVID and all the other things that have happened, they're going to have these issues. Parents have to be a partner with the schools in helping to solve that. And I think, quite frankly, if we get it where parents are more involved, then I think we're going to start to see a decline in some of these issues that we've been seeing across the country.
Well, I'll tell you, and I know you're hard on this too. I mean, we all wish that companies like yours didn't have to exist, right? But the reality is they do, because we live in a broken world, and whether that be for one reason or another, I don't want to get too philosophical with it. The reality is that we do have these threats that come in. And I know we may have some people watching today who say, hey, I'm a rural school district, or hey, I've got legacy technology, but I don't know where the heck to start. Where do you recommend people start, and how can they reach out to you for that first step?
Well, so first of all, if you're a rural public school district, usually like in Texas, the TEA, DOEs across the country provide really great resources. I will say that state governments have done a good job of that. In the state of Texas, Texas School Safety Center, a great place. There are great providers. Raptor's obviously, I think one of them, I work for them, but there are great providers.
I'll second
out
that.
there.
I'm not getting paid to say that, but I'll second that.
Well, I'm in a unique position that we get to root for our competitors, right? If you don't buy us, there's plenty of other good competitors out there. You could go out there and Google visitor management or panic alert technology, and you're going to have half a dozen of them pop up. And I monitor that kind of stuff because I'm in marketing, and I will tell you most of the ones that pop up are pretty good ones. So, I think there's plenty of resources out there. We've thrown a lot of money as both the federal, state, local level on building those resources. There's companies out there that have spent a lot of time that have really the right motivations about keeping kids safe. Ours is we are trying to protect every child, every school, every day. That is our mission, right? And we share that with other providers in this industry, and it is a mission for us. So I think find a good partner that you're comfortable with. Lots of good resources out there to operate off of, and I think, but the biggest thing is you have to be committed to it.
Yeah.
We see so many times, and I'm not just talking about the district. You can talk about a district, do all the right things in terms of buying technology and following the rules. I'm talking about the administrators. The principals at these elementaries and junior highs and high schools, they are the ones that really dictate, is there a culture of safety at that school? And I have seen it time and time again, and I've seen it fail, and I've seen it be successful. And it is those administrators, and God bless them, they have one of the hardest jobs on earth, right? And I know adding additional school safety on top of it, but I also know they got a heart for their kids, and they want to keep their kids safe. So when they're practicing those drills, they're holding their teachers accountable. Everybody's doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. When that terrible day comes, everybody's going to pull in the right direction, and that muscle memory is going to kick in, and it's going to save lives. And I think that's where it really starts.
I'll tell you, it's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing process, and it's always something where you need to be evaluating, having conversations. That's why folks like Raptor are so important to that conversation. Building that long-term relationship is really a key in building that success. I'll tell you what, David, I know it's not the most fun conversation in the world, but I appreciate you having it with me, and I appreciate your willingness to be transparent and answer a lot of the questions that folks either may not have the answers to, or sometimes are a little bit more quoted about answering. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Ben, appreciate you having me.
And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, check us out. Man, I'm ruining my own closing. Come on, just check us out, like us, whatever you do. We'll see you next time.